Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election. I'll be analyzing the latest polling data we have from the New York Times Siena, which is my personal favorite pollster. This is one of the best pollsters in the country. They consistently do very well. They were very accurate in 2022, which is why I'm such a big fan of them. And you'll remember that back in August when they released some state polls, I was very, very interested in them because I do trust New York Times. So what they saw was that we had a lead for Kamala Harris nationally. They said Harris was up in Wisconsin. She was up, and she was up by 4 points in all of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. They said she was up by 2 in North Carolina. They said she was down by 4 in Georgia. That she was up by 5 in Arizona, and that I believe she was tied in Nevada. But they haven't pulled Nevada, so we're not really talking about Nevada today. And so since then, they've done another round of polling. They didn't poll Wisconsin or Michigan, but they've polled Pennsylvania. They found the same result, Harris plus 4. But they redid Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Now, Georgia stayed the same. Trump led by 4 once again. But in Arizona and North Carolina, things were very bad for Kamala Harris. We saw in Arizona a 10-point shift. It was the exact opposite of what we'd seen last time. Trump at 50%, Harris at 45%. In North Carolina, we saw another, shift towards Trump. It was also the reverse. Instead of a 49-47 lead for Harris, it was a 49-47 lead for Trump. So, very interesting things going on here. It's notable that Trump is back in the lead in Arizona and that he's back in the lead in North Carolina, where, again, if we look at this electoral map, this doesn't guarantee Trump victory if we kind of fill in the states that we're expecting to go one way or another. But it does make it a lot easier for him, and it really, really restricts Kamala Harris's path to victory. Again, if she loses Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia, really her only path here is through winning the Rust Belt. And to get to 270 exactly, she'd have to win Wisconsin and Michigan, and then maybe Nevada to get to 276. But if you assume she loses these 3 states, this is her best path. It's still through the Rust Belt. So she can still win while losing these states plus Nevada. But if she loses even Wisconsin, it's game over, because even if she still wins Nevada, to win the election, right? And by the way, is she win Michigan too? To win the election, she needs something else. She would need a crazy upset in Florida or Texas or Ohio. And obviously that's something you just can't bet on happening. So that's why obviously these Rust Belt states that we didn't get a poll in are so interesting. I would have liked another poll, but the good news for her is that she's still ahead in Pennsylvania. But let's talk about these 2 states, North Carolina and Arizona. These are states we've seen a lot of interesting results in the polls. And what I like about, Arizona in specific is the polls there are just all over the place. I mean, Kamala Harris surged in August, and now Trump's leading in the majority of polling. And New York Times Siena, they kind of reflect this too. In August, they had Harris up by 5, which is a good amount. A 5-point lead in a poll is nothing to sneeze at. Now, Trump's up by 5, and we have that same dynamic. So this is, to me, what's interesting, is that I know the polls favor Trump in Arizona. You will note that in my most recent prediction from, I think, 2 weeks ago, I still had Harris ahead narrowly there. I think you can make a case for both sides. I still think Harris is going to beat her polls in Arizona, just like Democrats did in 2022, where they won the governorship despite being down 2.5 in the polls, and they won the Senate race by 5 while only being up by 1 on election day. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton did beat her polls in Arizona as well. So obviously, there is some precedent for this. But again, Arizona's polls have been all over the place, and they are just really, really, strange to me for that reason. But North Carolina, I think, can make a bit, more sense of, because the polls have been pretty close. We've seen some polls show Harris ahead. We've seen some polls show Trump ahead. The majority of nonpartisan pollsters do show a lead for Kamala Harris. But again, the best pollster in the country, arguably New York Times, they had Harris up by 2 last month. They have her down by 2 this month. So just assuming that she's down by a little bit there, right, we can kind of start to understand how this electoral map is going to play out. So just, while I fill in this map on the topic of North Carolina, unlike Arizona, I think Democrats have less reason to be optimistic about the polling. And obviously, I say this in almost every video, but the way the polls miss one year is often not the way the polls miss the next year. And a lot of people will look at polls and say, oh, well, the polls were off by 3.5% in this state last time, so you just apply that shift again to the same party, and there's your result. And the thing is, a lot of people did that in 2022, and it didn't work out for them. Because if you did that in 2022, you would have had Republicans winning 54 Senate seats and winning all the competitive governorships and getting 240 seats in the House. And as we all know, that didn't happen because polling misses change. And just thinking about it from an industry perspective, if I'm running a poll, which I don't run a poll, but if I did run a poll and I was wrong and I underestimated Republicans one year, I'd tweak my methodology and I'd say, hey, look, how do we avoid this? And if it happened twice in a row, I'd say, well, look, I tried to avoid it and I couldn't, avoid the polling miss. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my samples more Republican. And you know who does that? This poll, New York Times Siena. They have, Nate Cohen's actually talked about how this poll, first of all, in 2020, when Trump supporters picked up the phone and responded for Trump, but then hung up before they could answer the other questions, those responses didn't count. They're counting them now, which will, boost Trump and down ballot Republicans by proxy. But they also look like their samples are more Republican than they were in 2020. That's because they want to overcome that potential bias that polling, systematically underestimates GOP support. So this happens in most polls, and it happens in a lot of good polls too. It's not a bad thing. In 2016 and 2020, the polls were wrong about Trump. They underestimated his support twice in a row, right? Like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me three times, and the polls, could literally, be dead as an industry, right? That's an exaggeration, but polls really can't be wrong three times in a row here. So it makes, complete sense that they're trying to, feel out Trump support that maybe isn't there, because if they are wrong in the other direction, let's say Harris beats her polls, there's not really a huge penalty for that. They're like, okay, well, we were wrong this way for a change of pace. So, once you understand that, I think we can kind of like get why there could be polls underestimating Harris in some of these swing states. And I buy that to an extent in North Carolina and in Arizona. And I think in Georgia, too, where we see a 4-point Trump lead, and Harris hasn't moved at all since August. But in North Carolina, things are different. And that's my long-winded way of saying, if you believe the polls are going to underestimate Harris, you can make that argument, I think, in Georgia, and you can make it in Arizona and Nevada, right? In North Carolina, though, the last time Democrats really beat their polls here was, I think, 2008. Like, Democrats have not had a good polling cycle in North Carolina in a very long time. I think in 2012, they did okay relative to their polls with Barack Obama, but, like, I wouldn't say Obama really beat his polls. And in 2008, even, the polls, were pretty close. So, and Obama won it by a very close margin. So Democrats actually have never really beat their polls here. In 2022, the polls were pretty accurate in the Senate race. But in 2020, polls underestimated Donald Trump by a couple points. Same thing in 2016. In the 2014 North Carolina Senate race, which is one of the most important Senate races that year, Democrats actually were narrowly ahead. Republicans flipped that seat on election day by around 2%. And of course, we all know about the that same Senate seat, which is cursed for Democrats, apparently. In 2020, Democrats had a 3-point lead in the polling on election day, and Cal Cunningham, their candidate, lost by more than Joe Biden did. So, the fact we've seen a polling shift in North Carolina towards Donald Trump, the fact that Harris still hasn't really emerged as a clear polling leader here, to me, would make me a bit skeptical of this state if I'm Kamala Harris, but that's just, those are my thoughts. A lot of smart people do think she'll win North Carolina, but that's kind of where I am for now. So just now to talk about this map broadly before we, kind of wrap this video up. If we assume New York Times is right and Harris is winning Pennsylvania, but she's losing in the Sun Belt states, her path, there's like one path for her, right? There's no other permutation we can make. She needs Michigan and she needs Michigan and she needs Wisconsin. If she wins Nevada instead of Wisconsin, she loses. If she wins Michigan instead of Wisconsin, she loses. And obviously, we see the same thing for Donald Trump. What he really needs here is just Wisconsin or Michigan. Nevada doesn't do him any good because it doesn't get him to 270. It's nice to have, but 270 is what you need. So Wisconsin does the trick. Michigan does the trick as well. So when we accept this map to be true, we kind of close off the path. We close off other outcomes. And we just say whoever wins these two states is the president. Harris needs 2 of them. Trump needs 1 of them. So in that way, you get a kind of an advantage for Trump because we're giving him the swing Sun Belt states. So New York Times, what they're saying is, look, Kamala Harris, is ahead in Pennsylvania, good for her. But what she needs to do is she needs to win both these 2 Rust Belt states in addition to Pennsylvania. And if she can't do that, she's not the president because she's down by 5 in Arizona, she's down by 4 in Georgia. And the only state that's within a polling miss would be North Carolina. But North Carolina is the state of these 3 that is worse for Democrats, in the polls historically. If she was down by 2 in Georgia right now, I think I'd probably call her the favorite to win, but she's not down by 2. She's down by 4. And so, given that state's history, you could make the case for Democrats, but a 4-point margin's a little too much. In 2022, they were down by 1. If Harris is down by 1 in New York Times on election day, I'll probably call her the favorite here, but she's down by 4, right? That's the big problem. So, being a Democrat relying on North Carolina wouldn't have paid off in 2020 or 2016 or 2012. Maybe it'll pay off in 2024, but again, it's one of those things where I'll see it when I believe it. So that's why this map, to me, even though Harris is winning Pennsylvania, which is the most important state here, it's still a bad sign, or, not that's a bad sign, but these polls are still bad news for her because they've shown a shift away from her in Arizona and a shift away from her in North Carolina. These are 2 states that could be very good making up margin of error because these states are actually combined for more than the Rust Belt. She could lose both these, Harris could lose both these states if she won Arizona and North Carolina, by the way. And Donald Trump, he won North Carolina twice, he won Arizona once. All he needs to do really, this is where his path comes in. All he needs to do really is just hold down the fort in these 2016 states. It doesn't matter if he loses Nevada. You can give that to Harris here. Even give her Pennsylvania, right? What matters for Trump is that if in the South he holds down the fort with the 2016 states, which shouldn't be too hard, because again, in 2020 he won North Carolina, so that's the easiest one, and then he came within 12,000 votes of winning Arizona and Georgia each, right? What he needs then is just to win one of these Rust Belt states, and that's assuming he doesn't win Pennsylvania, because in that case, what he needs is just, again, to win, one, including Pennsylvania. So that's the Trump path, and the New York Times, believe it or not, actually does think that this is in place. So that's where we are right now in terms of New York Times. Again, a very good pollster, concerning signs for Kamala Harris, but as always, there's a lot to say. So let me know what you think. Let me know who you think is going to win. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all next time.